Okay, in following our basic techniques, I'm going to talk about some ways to apply the color and what, to create certain effects. One of them is glazing. And here we have our previously painted areas. They are dry, at least dry to the touch right now. So a glazing is when you take and paint a transparent layer of color over a previously painted area that is dry. It is a way to optically change or mix the color and the value without physically mixing the color. So we have blue here, and what I'm going to do is take I have a transparent yellow. This is, not all yellows are transparent in nature, but this one is a transparent yellow called aureolin, also a cobalt yellow. So you can see it doesn't look too heavy here. So when I take it and I paint it on top of the blue, you can see how you see the blue through the yellow. And it optically mixes to green, but it's not a physical mix. It's an optical mix. And that's what we call a glaze. Glazes are used to change the value. Say I can take here is a transparent color called quinacridone burnt scarlet. It's a transparent color, and I can put it on top of that over the blue. You can see how it made a darker neutral here, whereas this made it obviously green. This one is making a darker neutral. And if you mix the two of these together physically, the blue and this color, it would create a brown or a gray, depending on the proportion of the colors that you mixed. However, there is another technique called a veil, which is similar to glazing, except it's more of an atmospheric effect, and it involves laying opaque washes on top of areas. So for that, we want to try a different color. And we're going to take our yellow ochre. See, watercolor is so much easier to clean. So I'm going to take our yellow ochre, and lay that on over an area here. Now the yellow ochre is slightly opaque, so you can see it sitting on top of the paint more than you can see it over here. The analogy I use for a glaze and a veil is to say that for a glaze that you're looking through a colored lens. So you have, say, sunglasses. You look through your sunglasses and you see the landscape around you that's darkened, but you don't really think about the sunglasses adding a beam in front of you. For a veil, it's like you're looking through, you hold a scarf up to your face. You can see through the scarf, but you're very conscious of that scarf being in front of your face. And the same thing is how I feel about a veil. That I can see through it, but I can always see this area on top of it. So a veil can be used for different sort of atmospheric effects that you want. Say if you want to give the sense of clouds or smoke or something that's in front of a background area. So now we're going to talk about lifting paint. Lifting paint is something that you can do. People think watercolor you can't make mistakes, you can't change anything, but you can. There is a window of opportunity that you can do some correcting. And one thing that you can use is your sponge. So the sponge is very useful for doing wet lifts or lifting techniques. So it's damp because I had put it in the water earlier, and you always want to use it damp. And I can get a little bit more water in there right now. And what I'm going to do is these are our previously dry areas. They painted, but they're dry now. And I'm going to just put some water on them. And I'm going to take my sponge and I'm going to lift. See, I can lift back to white almost. You can see the paint that picked up, the sponge picked up. And the sponge is not the only one you can use for that. You can use Q-tips and Kleenex and paper towels, and you can use your brushes. In this case, I'm going to use the flat wash and get a nice line. So first what I do, just lay water in there. Then I keep squeezing water out of the brush because I want the brush to pick it up from the surface of the paper. So you see I can pick up some nice lines by doing what we call lifting. Now it's easier, of course, to do it when the surface is wet. And the ability to lift paint from dry area depends a lot on the colors that you've used and the type of paper that it is. And this student grade paper is a harder surfaced paper, so it's easier to lift back to the white. That's not true on all papers. Some papers are a little bit harder to lift than others. It depends on the paper itself. Now, if I were to lay down a wet area, let's go with some green. Of course, it's very easy to pick up when it's wet. I can take the sponge and I can just pick up like that when it's wet. It's when the painted area is dry that it's a little trickier. You'll also notice, though, that when you do that, it leaves a soft edge. It's a pretty soft edge. This is a little sharper because it's a dry surface, but it still has some softness around the edge because you're adding water into it. And this is a very soft edge here. So you think about, when do you want to use a hard edge versus a soft edge? When would you do this sort of lifting in your work? Aside from making mistakes, you might want to actually use this as a painting technique. One thing that I do is use it for reflected light areas. So I will lay down a wash and then I will lift it if there's a strong reflected light area. And that gives me a nice softer surface. It's not quite as white as the white of the paper, but it's still pretty light.